On May 21, 1997, the Resources Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, by a vote of 44-1, passed H.R. 856, the United States Puerto Rico Political Status Act. The bill provides a process by which the 3.8 million U.S. citizens of the island can move from territorial status to full self-government. This report explains the bill's origin and development.
And the bill is agreed to and reported to the House. And I want to thank all of you, especially you, Governor, for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It is a historical moment.
Three months earlier, Resources Committee Chairman Don Young of Alaska announced the introduction of H.R. 856 to the press.
The legislature of Puerto Rico has once again asked the Congress to take actions to resolve the Puerto Rico's political status.
Clearly, Puerto Rico needs the opportunity to freely express their wishes regarding the options for full self-government.
There are three clearly defined options for the people of Puerto Rico: statehood, Commonwealth, independence.
The United States Congress will have to let the people in Puerto Rico know how it truly feels about the future of this relationship. Where I am clear is that the present relationship is one that has never been defined as anything but territorial and perhaps colonial in status. That has to change.
The bill continues a legislative process begun in the 104th Congress, offering Puerto Ricans congressionally defined options for a future political status. If passed, voters would choose among options in a plebiscite to be held in 1998, 100 years after the U.S. took possession of the island during the Spanish-American War. Since it was ceded to the United States by the Treaty of Paris in 1898, the island has been subject to congressional jurisdiction under the territorial clause of the U.S. Constitution. In the ensuing century, a close relationship with the United States developed, but permanent sovereignty and full self-government as a state of the U.S. or as an independent nation has yet to be achieved. In 1917, Puerto Ricans were offered U.S. citizenship by the Jones Act, and all but a few welcomed it, declining the option of separate citizenship. Since then, Puerto Ricans may move freely within the 50 states, and once they establish residence, may vote in local, state, and federal elections. Those residing on the island enjoy no such privilege. In 1952, Congress authorized and the Puerto Rican electorate approved a form of local self-government known by the English term Commonwealth. Intended to be an interim step leading to an eventual permanent status, it provided for a congressionally approved local constitution, island government based on the three-branch federal model, and exemption from U.S. federal taxes.
Al fundarse el Estado libre en voluntaria asociación de ciudadanía y de afecto con los Estados Unidos de América.
Under Commonwealth, islanders developed an active and intensely competitive political environment and began to govern themselves in most local matters. Puerto Rico, however, continued to be subject to U.S. law and the jurisdiction of the U.S. Congress. In the intervening 45 years, popular sentiment moved from overwhelming support of the Commonwealth arrangement to a desire for full self-government and equal rights for American citizens residing on the island. In a 1993 locally sponsored plebiscite, voters chose between independence, U.S. statehood, and an enhanced version of the present Commonwealth. Local political parties, aligned with the various status options, defined the terms. Although no formula won a majority, it was clear that 100% of the electorate wanted change. Subsequent to that plebiscite, the Puerto Rican legislature petitioned the U.S. Congress to respond to the voting results and to the status definitions provided by the parties. Congress did so, and H.R. 3024 of the 104th Congress and H.R. 856 of the present Congress became the process by which the U.S. House of Representatives provided answers to that petition. A companion bill, S-472, has been introduced in the U.S. Senate, consistent in all significant respects to H.R. 856. The intent of the legislation is to authorize Puerto Ricans to decide on a status, bestowing permanent sovereignty to their island in a plebiscite, to be held no later than December 31st, 1998. Participation is limited to voters duly registered under Puerto Rican election law. The bill offers voters three choices: statehood, separate sovereignty, or current status, which constitutes the present Commonwealth arrangement. Each status option is clearly defined in the legislation. A majority of votes for any choice triggers a predetermined process. Since Commonwealth is not a permanent status, a majority vote for the status quo triggers subsequent status votes, at least one every 10 years. A majority vote for either statehood or separate sovereignty leads to a transition plan drafted by the President of the United States and approved by the U.S. Congress. The electorate then votes on the transition plan for the winning option. If a majority approves it, then that option moves towards implementation in an orderly process. If statehood is the winning option, the island would join the Union on an equal basis with the other states. If separate sovereignty is the winning option, the island would become a separate nation, either fully independent or as a separate nation in association with the United States by treaty. After the transition period for the winning option is completed, Congress and the Puerto Rican electorate again vote to finally ratify implementation of the new status. If implementation is ratified, then the permanent political status of Puerto Rico is inaugurated, as approved by Congress and the Puerto Rican electorate. In the 105th Congress, the House Committee on Resources held 3 public hearings on the bill. The first was in Washington, with subsequent sessions in Puerto Rico, one in the capital city of San Juan and the other in the principal western city of the island, Mayagüez. In the Washington hearing, the island's governor, Pedro Rosselló, and leaders of the 3 Puerto Rican political parties testified as to how each status option should be defined in the bill.
We have to face the issue. Either we want to be Americans or we want to be Puerto Ricans. That's the real issue.
Charlie?
Issues brought before committee members related to the nature of the present Commonwealth arrangement, the status of American citizenship under the 3 ballot options, the status of the English language under the Commonwealth and statehood options, the economic impact on the island of future political change, and the positions of the 3 political parties on a range of issues.
We have talked long enough in Puerto Rico about our political status. We have talked for 100 years. It is time now to act and to find out how strong is the creed of equality, democratic values, and pluralism of our nation once the voice of the people of Puerto Rico is heard in the proposed 1998 plebiscite.
In Puerto Rico, these issues found expression in the streets adjoining the hearing venues as local political parties organized rallies. Such demonstrations illustrate the stake which island political structures have in any change in the status quo. The 3 parties define each issue according to its own political aspirations. The PDP, or Commonwealth Party, advocates increased autonomy from the U.S. Congress, immunity from federal taxation, and selected law, with full benefits and protections of citizenship. The bill describes the Commonwealth option as a temporary and territorial status subject to congressional oversight. The present local self-government would continue, as would statutory U.S. citizenship of those born on the island. The Commonwealth would continue to be subject to applicable federal law, including any respecting the use of the English language in official business and public education. The PIP, or Independence Party, advocates separate sovereignty from the U.S. while retaining certain rights to U.S. benefits and citizenship and/or unrestricted immigration to U.S. sovereign territory. The bill describes separate sovereignty as an independent and fully self-governing nation with full authority over its territory and population. Those born on the island would have Puerto Rican citizenship, and those now alive the choice between Puerto Rican or statutory U.S. citizenship. The bill allows for a fully independent Puerto Rico to gain free association with the U.S. by treaty between the two sovereign nations. In no case would dual U.S. Puerto Rican citizenship obtain. The New Progressive Party, or NPP, advocates the permanent union of the island with the U.S. as a state. H.R. 856 provides for the island to join the Union of States with its rights secured by the U.S. Constitution. Laws and treaties of the United States are fully applicable, including those respecting the use of the English language. The U.S. citizenship of those born on the island would be the same as for those born in the other 50 states. As a state, Puerto Rico would be represented by 2 senators and by House seats proportional to its population. NPP Governor Pedro Rosselló, enjoying his party's rally, commented on the bill.
We've already seen in the House that over 80 sponsors public hearings like this. In the Senate, a similar bill has been introduced. The President has established his commitment for allowing Puerto Rico to have the opportunity in '98 to celebrate a plebiscite or a referendum. So I think the process is going very fast.
The appearance of former Governor Luis Ferré and incumbent Governor Pedro Rosselló on the same platform illustrates support for H.R. 856 among Puerto Ricans of different mainland political affiliations. The current governor identifies with the National Democratic Party, while former Governor Ferré is known as Mr. Republican on the island. Both support statehood for Puerto Rico.
This is a point of critical mass. The Congress now is fully convinced that they have a responsibility to discharge it. And they're going to discharge it. It will take time, it will require arguments, it will require conviction, but they have the conviction deeply in their heart that they are under the obligation to give Puerto Rico something that gives us, U.S. citizens of the United States, the dignity that goes with statehood.
Statehood is not a question of dollars and cents.
Mrs. Zoraida Foniedas, a Republican National Committee woman, testified before the Young Committee.
I am a very close friend of Governor Rosselló, who is a Democrat, and the Congressman Romero, who is also a Democrat. But we belong here to the same party, and so we are trying to get statehood for Puerto Rico. So I think this is a real cooperation between both parties. It's really time that Puerto Rico should make that decision.
The PNP is like a coalition of different forces, mostly Republican, but with a lot of Democrats. As a matter of fact, our governor is a Democrat, but his lieutenant governor is a Republican. And I will say that 80% of his cabinet is Republican. But it's a coalition of forces for self-determination and to achieve our political rights.
The 1996 general elections in Puerto Rico became a contest between supporters and opponents of the United States-Puerto Rico Political Status Act. In that election, every office, from the island's governorship to seats on local municipal councils, were contested for a 4-year term of office. Over 80% of the island's electorate turned out to vote. Detractors of the bill made opposition to it a central election issue in its campaign for governor and resident commissioner. PDP candidate for governor Hector Luis Acevedo was a critic of the bill in an earlier hearing held on the island. His opponent, the NPP incumbent governor, Pedro Rosselló, was a supporter. Resident Commissioner Carlos Romero Barceló was criticized by his PDP opponent for his strong backing of the bill. PDP leaders said that voters should treat the election as a referendum on the Young Bill process and elect candidates who spoke in opposition to it. Supporters of the process had much to celebrate as the vote tally mounted. The NPP had won a decisive victory. Governor Rosselló and resident Commissioner Romero Barceló were both re-elected by wide margins, and the NPP party won control of both houses of the legislature by a two-thirds majority. When the magnitude of their popular support became clear, Young Bill supporters saw it as a mandate to continue to press for its support in the 105th Congress.
The nation can no longer maintain a colony. It is the only nation in the world that has a colony of over 1 million inhabitants, and it's almost 4 million inhabitants. So I think it's to the benefit of for the image of the nation and in its democratic push toward the world, asking other countries to strengthen their democratic process. To have Puerto Rico as a colony belies that purpose. So the United States has to solve this problem together with us.
As this report goes into release, the House Resources Committee has reported H.R. 856 to the full body. Committee Chairman Don Young, anticipating passage of his bill, issued a statement. The voters, he said, will have the opportunity to make an informed choice in a legitimate act of self-determination. The bill creates a fair process but does not impose a result on Congress or the people of Puerto Rico. In 1998, Puerto Rico will have existed as an unincorporated territory, many would say colony, of the United States for an entire century. Since 1917, its people have been citizens of a country in which they have had no equal voice or vote. By their patriotism and often their blood, they have earned the chance for the self-determination that H.R. 856 offers. This is the moment to resolve the island's political status in a manner consistent with the nation's values and democratic principles. The dignity and international reputation of both Puerto Rico and the United States are in the balance.